The afternoon sun was soft that day, hanging low over the quiet road that cut through the edge of the small town. She was walking home after finishing her shift at the local diner. Her uniform smelled faintly of coffee and dish soap, and she could still hear the clinking of plates in her ears. It had been a long day, nothing unusual, nothing exciting, just another regular afternoon. She walked slowly, thinking about what to cook for dinner and whether she still had enough rice at home. The road was nearly empty. A few cars passed now and then, their tires humming over the asphalt. She liked walking home. It gave her time to breathe and clear her mind. She didn't have much in life, just a small rented room, a few plants by the window, and a dream that someday things would get better. She didn't expect anything extraordinary to happen to her. Life was simple, sometimes hard, but mostly quiet. Then she heard it, the screech of tires, sharp and terrifying, cutting through the calm air like a scream. Her heart jumped. She turned her head just in time to see a silver car swerving wildly on the opposite lane. It skidded, hit the side railing, and flipped once before landing hard against a tree. The sound was so loud it made her flinch. For a second, she couldn't move. Everything around her went silent except for the hissing of steam and the faint crackle of fire beginning to spread from under the hood. Her body reacted before her mind could think. She dropped her bag on the side of the road and ran. There were no other people close by, just a man standing far away, frozen in shock, and another car that slowed down but didn't stop. She could smell gasoline already. The air was thick with smoke. The front of the car was smashed in and the windows were cracked like spiderwebs. She could hear someone crying, high, weak, and scared. It wasn't a grown person's cry. It was a child. "Please, no," she whispered, rushing toward the sound. Her heart raced so fast she could feel it in her throat. She bent down to look inside through the shattered glass. A small boy was strapped in the back seat, his face covered in soot, his tiny hands trying to reach for something. He was crying so hard his whole body shook. The driver's seat was empty, no one else was there. Maybe the person had been thrown out or had gone for help, but there was no time to think about that. She tugged at the car door, but it wouldn't move. It was jammed from the crash. The flames were getting bigger now, crawling up from the hood and licking the side of the car. She looked around desperately, searching for something to use. There was a small rock near her feet. She grabbed it, smashing it against the window as hard as she could. It didn't break. She tried again, this time with all her strength. The glass cracked, a small hole appearing in the middle. Smoke poured out, making her cough. She hit it one more time and finally the window shattered. "Hold on, baby, I'm coming," she said between coughs, reaching inside. The heat was unbearable. The little boy's face was wet with tears, his lips trembling. She reached for the seatbelt, but her finger slipped. It was twisted and stuck. Her heart pounded as she pulled and tugged at it, but it wouldn't budge. The fire was getting closer now, and she could feel the heat against her arm. She didn't care. She bent down, using the sharp edge of the broken glass to cut through the strap. It tore, and she quickly lifted the boy into her arms. As she pulled him out, her sleeve brushed against a flame, burning a small hole in her uniform. She didn't even feel it. All that mattered was getting him away from the car. She ran as fast as she could, stumbling once but holding the child tightly to her chest. The moment she reached the grassy side of the road, there was a loud boom behind her. The car burst into flames, sending a wave of heat that made her shield the boy's face with her hands. Her ears rang from the sound. People were coming now. Drivers who had stopped, a couple running from nearby houses, someone shouting to call for help. She sat down on the grass, gasping for air. The boy clung to her, sobbing into her shoulder. His small body trembled uncontrollably. She rocked him gently, whispering, "It's okay, you're safe now. You're safe." Her hands were shaking, covered with small cuts from the glass. The smell of smoke clung to her hair and clothes. Someone handed her a bottle of water, and she used it to cool the child's face, wiping away the soot with the edge of her sleeve. He looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes, his little lips quivering as he tried to speak. But no words came out, just soft, broken sobs. A man in a business suit rushed toward them, his tie undone, his face pale with panic. "My son! My son!" he cried. He dropped to his knees beside her, checking the child frantically. The boy reached for him, still crying. The man's relief was so strong that he nearly collapsed, hugging the boy tightly. "Oh, thank God," he whispered again and again. She sat quietly, still trying to catch her breath. The fire truck sirens echoed in the distance. Someone said they had already called an ambulance. A few people were filming the burning car from far away, but most eyes were on her, the girl sitting on the grass, soot-streaked, holding the boy's blanket that she had pulled out with him. The man looked at her finally. His eyes were full of shock and gratitude. You saved him, he said, his voice trembling. She shook her head weakly, still coughing. I heard him crying. I couldn't leave him there. Her throat hurt from the smoke and her hands were stinging where tiny burns had started to form. When the ambulance arrived, they took the child first. The paramedics wrapped him in a soft blanket, checking for injuries. He seemed mostly fine, scared, shaken, but alive. They wanted to check her too, but she refused at first. I'm okay, she said softly. But one of them insisted, seeing the redness on her arm. They guided her to sit on the edge of the ambulance and gently cleaned her burns. As they worked, she watched the man holding his son near the road. The boy had stopped crying now, resting his head on his father's shoulder. The man kept glancing toward her as if trying to find words, but failing. He looked powerful and well-dressed, the kind of person who probably had drivers, assistants, and security. But in that moment, he looked just like any other father who almost lost everything. His eyes told her everything he couldn't say. People began whispering around them, talking about how brave she was. Someone said they had seen her run into the fire without hesitation. Another said she could have died. She didn't feel brave. She felt shaky, dizzy, and strangely calm all at once. It didn't feel real yet. Only when she looked at the little boy again did it hit her. He could have died if she hadn't been there. The police came next, asking questions. She told them what she saw, how it happened, how she broke the window and pulled him out. They took notes, thanked her, and said she would probably be in the news. That thought made her nervous. She didn't like attention. She just wanted to go home, take a shower, and make sure the boy was safe. The man approached her again after talking to the police. His expression had softened now, though his hand still shook slightly. I don't even know your name, he said quietly. She hesitated before answering. It's okay, she said. I'm just glad he's fine. He stared at her for a long moment as if trying to remember every detail of her face. Then he nodded. You don't understand what you've done. You saved my whole world today. She smiled faintly, though her eyes were tired. Anyone would have done the same, she murmured. He didn't reply. He just watched her for another second before the paramedics asked him to bring the boy for a final check. When the ambulances finally left, the road grew quiet again. The burnt car was nothing but black smoke and twisted metal. The smell of it hung in the air long after. She walked slowly back to where she had dropped her bag earlier. It was covered in dust, but still there. She picked it up, brushed it off, and stood for a moment, staring at the place where everything had happened. It felt strange. Just an hour ago, she had been thinking about dinner, and now she had pulled a child from fire. She took a deep breath and started walking home. Every step felt heavy, not from pain, but from the weight of what had just happened. She didn't know who the man was, didn't know his story, didn't even know where he had come from. But she knew one thing. She would never forget the sound of that child's cry or the way his little hands clung to her as the flames rose behind them. When she reached her small apartment, the first thing she did was wash her face. The water turned gray from the soot. She looked at herself in the mirror, her hair messy, her cheeks scratched, her eyes red from smoke. She didn't look like a hero. She looked like someone who had just barely made it through something unreal. She touched her burned sleeve and smiled faintly. You're okay, she whispered to herself. He's okay. That night she sat by her window listening to the faint hum of cars in the distance. Her hands still hurt, but her heart felt calm. Somewhere out there, a little boy was sleeping safely in a hospital bed, and his father was by his side. She didn't know that by morning her story would be everywhere, on the news, online, and in the papers. People would call her the woman who ran into fire, and the man whose child she saved would start looking for her, wanting to see her again. But for now, she didn't know any of that. She was just a tired woman who had done what she believed anyone should do, save a life, no matter whose it was. The morning after the accident, the town woke up to news that spread faster than anyone expected. Every local channel, every online post, every radio talk mentioned it. A young woman had risked her life to save a toddler from a burning luxury car. People were calling her a hero, though she didn't feel like one. She hadn't done it for praise or attention. She had just followed her heart. She didn't even realize how big the story had become until her phone started buzzing nonstop. Co-workers from the diner sent her messages saying they saw her on TV. Some sent pictures taken from the scene that strangers had posted online. She couldn't believe it. In those pictures, she looked almost unrecognizable. Her hair messy, her face blackened by smoke, her uniform torn and burned at the sleeve. And yet, people online called her brave, fearless, and an angel. It felt strange. She wasn't used to being noticed. She decided not to go to work that day. Her arm still hurt a little from the burns, and she hadn't slept properly. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fire, heard the screeching sound of metal, and smelled the smoke. The memory of the little boy's cry was still clear in her head, but she also remembered the moment she held him, felt him breathing, and realized he was alive. That memory was stronger than all the fear. In another part of the city, the powerful businessman who had nearly lost his child sat quietly in a hospital room. The boy was asleep now, his tiny hand resting beside him, his breathing calm. Doctors said he was safe and had only suffered a few minor bruises. The father had barely spoken since the night before. The shock had settled deep inside him, mixing with guilt and relief. He was a man known for being in control of everything, his business, his image, his life. But for the first time, he had faced something he couldn't buy, fix, or plan. He had faced the loss of his child, and it was a stranger who saved him. He remembered seeing her for the first time, the woman sitting by the road, her hands shaking but her eyes calm. He could still see her holding his son, whispering to comfort him. She looked so ordinary, yet something about her had felt extraordinary. He had thanked her briefly that night, but it didn't feel enough. Words couldn't cover what she had done. He wanted to see her again, not to repay her with money or gifts, but simply to look her in the eye and say thank you properly, the way he meant it. By afternoon, reporters had already tracked down her name and where she worked. Cameras waited outside the small diner, but she wasn't there. A few people from her neighborhood saw them and pointed to her building. She heard the noise from her window and sighed. She didn't like attention. It made her uneasy. She wasn't hiding, but she also didn't want to be filmed or questioned. What could she possibly say? That she was scared but didn't think twice? That she didn't see fire? Only a child who needed help? Later that day, she received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, the voice on the other end was calm but firm. "This is the office of the man whose child you saved. He would like to meet you personally if you're available." Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't expect that. For a moment, she thought about saying no. She didn't want to make a scene or deal with cameras again, but something inside her told her it was the right thing to do. They arranged to meet at the hospital where the boy was still recovering. She wore a simple dress, nothing fancy. Her hands were still wrapped in small bandages and her hair was tied back loosely. As she entered the hospital, she felt nervous. People recognized her from the news and smiled or whispered softly as she passed. It made her cheeks warm. She wasn't used to being noticed like that. When she reached the room, the door was half open. Inside, the man sat beside his son's bed, gently fixing the blanket. He looked up when she knocked lightly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room was quiet, except for the sound of the hospital machines. Then he stood, straightened his coat, and walked toward her. "I didn't know how to thank you yesterday," he said softly. His voice wasn't as cold as it had been before. It carried something different now, something humbled. "You saved my son's life. I don't even know how to begin to express what that means to me." She smiled a little, unsure of what to say. "I'm just glad he's okay," she replied. "That's all that matters." He looked at her closely, as if studying her face. "You risked your life for someone you didn't even know," he said. "Most people would have waited for help. You didn't." "I didn't really think," she said honestly. "I just heard him crying. I had to do something." There was a long pause. He nodded slowly, his eyes softening. "I owe you more than I can ever repay." "I don't want anything," she said quickly. "Please don't feel like you owe me. I just did what I thought was right." He smiled faintly for the first time. "I understand," he said. "But at least, allow me to thank you properly." He invited her to sit. The little boy woke up after a while, blinking sleepily. When he saw her, his eyes brightened. He reached out his small hand, recognizing her face. She leaned forward and held his hand gently, her heart warming. The boy smiled for the first time since the accident. The father watched them, emotion flickering in his eyes. It was a quiet, powerful moment, simple but full of meaning. Before she left, he told her he wanted to do something for her, but she politely refused again. She didn't want her act of kindness to feel like a transaction. She didn't save that child expecting anything in return. That was never the point. As she walked out of the hospital, she noticed a group of reporters waiting outside, flashing cameras, microphones, questions, all aimed at her. They wanted to know how it felt to be a hero, what went through her mind, what she thought of the man whose son she saved. She tried to answer politely, keeping her words simple and humble. "Anyone would have done the same," she repeated again and again. But deep down, she knew not everyone would have. Still, she didn't want to make herself sound like someone special. That night, she received another call, this time from the man himself. He said he had arranged a small private dinner to thank her properly, away from cameras, just a quiet evening with a few close people. She hesitated, but his voice sounded sincere, not formal or forced. So she agreed. When she arrived at the restaurant, it wasn't what she expected. There were no fancy decorations or reporters, just a simple table in a quiet corner, a warm meal, and a peaceful atmosphere. The man greeted her kindly, dressed, casually this time, without the sharpness of his usual business look. He looked like a father, not a businessman. "I didn't want a big event," he said. "Just a quiet thank you." They talked over dinner, not about the accident, but about life. He asked about her job, her family, her dreams. She told him she worked at the diner, lived alone, and hoped to study one day if she could afford it. He listened closely, not interrupting once. It surprised her how genuine he seemed, nothing like the person she had imagined from the news stories about him being strict and unapproachable. At one point, he said quietly, "You know, I built everything in my life. My company, my home, my reputation. But when I saw my son inside that burning car, none of it mattered. I would have given it all up just to get him back. And you gave him back to me." She didn't know how to respond. She looked down at her plate, feeling a lump in her throat. "I'm just glad he's safe," she whispered. "That's enough." When dinner ended, he told her he wanted to help her somehow, not to repay her, but to make her life a little easier. Maybe a job at his company, or support for her studies, or something that could make a real difference. She smiled gently and said she would think about it. She didn't want to accept out of politeness or pressure. She wanted to be sure it was right. When she walked out of the restaurant, the cool night air brushed against her face. The city lights shimmered in the distance. She felt a strange peace in her heart, not pride but quiet gratitude. She had saved a life, yes, but she had also witnessed something rare. A powerful man's walls breaking down, revealing the father and human being beneath all the success and strength. At home, she sat by her window again, looking up at the stars. She thought about how quickly life could change, how one ordinary walk home had turned into something unforgettable. Somewhere in that hospital room, a little boy was sleeping soundly because she had been there at the right moment. And his father, once a stranger, was now someone who saw her not just as a rescuer, but as a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew this wasn't the end of the story. Their paths had crossed for a reason, and something told her that life still had more to show her, something beyond that single act of courage. As she finally closed her eyes that night, she smiled softly. For the first time in a long while, her heart felt light, as if she had done something truly meaningful, not for fame, not for reward, but because it was simply the right thing to do. The following week passed quietly, but something inside her had changed. She went back to work at the diner, serving customers, refilling coffee cups, and wiping down tables just like always. Yet, every now and then, her thoughts wandered back to that day. The sound of the explosion, the little boy's trembling hands, and the man's expression when he first saw his son alive, all of it stayed with her like a movie she couldn't turn off. People at the diner treated her differently now. Some smiled at her with admiration. Some whispered softly when she passed, and a few even asked to take pictures with her. She tried to laugh it off, saying, "I just did what anyone would do." But deep down, she knew life didn't go back to normal that easily. Once you've looked into the eyes of someone who almost lost everything, something inside you shifts forever. One slow afternoon, as she wiped down the counter, her manager walked up to her with a surprised look. "Someone's here to see you," he said. She turned and saw a familiar face through the glass door. It was him, the same man whose child she had saved. This time he wasn't dressed in his usual suit. He wore a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, and looked more relaxed than before. He smiled faintly as he stepped inside. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. She shook her head, though she could feel her heart beating faster. "No, not at all. I just didn't expect you here. I wanted to see how you were doing," he said, his tone gentle, "and to thank you again properly." She smiled awkwardly. "You already thanked me." "Not enough," he replied quietly. "May I sit?" She nodded, and they took a small table in the corner. For a while, neither of them said much. The noise of clinking dishes and soft chatter filled the background. He finally spoke again. "I thought about what you said last time, that you didn't want anything in return. But still, I'd feel wrong just walking away as if your kindness was a passing thing. It wasn't. You changed something in me." She looked at him surprised. "Changed something?" He nodded. "Yes, I used to think success was all about control, about power, about not needing anyone. But that day, watching you pull my son out of fire, I realized how helpless I truly was. You reminded me that life is fragile, that people matter more than things." His voice was calm, but there was a heaviness in his words. She could tell he meant every bit of it. "I didn't do anything special," she said softly. He smiled slightly. "That's what makes it special," he said. "You didn't have to do it. But you did." They talked for a while longer, mostly about ordinary things. He asked about her work, and she told him about the diner and how she sometimes dreamed of studying social work or nursing. "I just like helping people," she said simply. When she spoke, he listened carefully, almost like he was trying to memorize every word. Before he left, he handed her a small envelope. "This isn't money," he said, seeing her hesitate. "It's an invitation. My company is hosting a charity event next week. I'd like you to come, not as a guest of honor or a headline story, just as yourself. I think you'll like it." She wanted to refuse, but his sincerity stopped her. "All right," she said after a pause. "I'll come." The night of the event arrived sooner than she expected. She stood outside the large hotel, feeling slightly out of place. The building sparkled with lights, and guests in elegant clothes moved in and out of the glass doors. She wore a simple dress she had borrowed from a friend, her hair tied neatly. She wasn't used to being around such people, but she reminded herself that she wasn't there to impress anyone. When she entered the hall, the first person she saw was him. He greeted her warmly and introduced her to a few people from his company. Everyone seemed to know who she was, though they were polite enough not to say it directly. The man's son was there too, looking much healthier and smiling brightly. When he saw her, he ran to her and wrapped his little arms around her leg. "You came," he said excitedly. She laughed and knelt down to hug him back. The whole room softened at that sight. Some people clapped quietly. Others smiled, touched by the moment. She felt her cheeks warm, but it wasn't embarrassment. It was something gentler, a sense of being seen, but for the right reasons. As the evening went on, she found herself actually enjoying it. She listened to speeches about charity work and community projects, and she realized how much could be done if people used their power and money for good things. The man watched her a few times from across the room, noticing how naturally she blended in despite her simple background. Later, as the event began to wind down, he walked over to her. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wanted you to see what we're trying to do, real help, real change. People like you remind me what it's really about." She smiled. "It's good what you're doing." "I didn't expect this side of you." He laughed softly. "Most people don't. I've spent years hiding behind work and numbers." But that day you made me want to do more. There was a short silence before she asked, "Do you really think people can change that quickly?" He looked thoughtful. "Not quickly. But sometimes one moment can wake you up. The rest is what you do after." His words stayed with her long after the event ended. When she went home that night, she felt something unusual. Hope. Not just for herself, but for him, for the child, for how life could turn unexpected pain into something good. Over the next few weeks, they stayed in touch. He would sometimes stop by the diner, not with reporters or assistants, but alone, just to have coffee and talk. At first, her coworkers teased her lightly, but soon they got used to it. He never acted superior or made her feel small. Instead, he asked about her life like he truly cared. One afternoon, he brought his son along. The boy sat at the counter, happily munching on fries while the two of them talked. It was a warm, sunny day, and the diner felt more alive than ever. "He doesn't stop talking about you," the man said with a smile. "He keeps saying you're his hero," she laughed softly. "He's the brave one. He went through something no child should." As she said that, she looked at the boy and felt a deep affection, almost like he was part of her own story now. She hadn't realized how much that one act of courage had tied their lives together. After a while, the man leaned forward slightly. "There's something I'd like to offer you," he said carefully. "I know you don't like accepting things, but please hear me out." She looked curious. "What is it?" He took a small envelope from his jacket. Inside was a letter, an admission form and a scholarship offer to a local college. "It's for your studies," he said. "You mentioned you wanted to help people. This way you can do it on a bigger scale. You've earned it." Her eyes widened. "I can't accept this," she said quickly. "It's too much." "It's not charity," he replied softly. "It's a thank you. Not for saving my son, but for reminding me of what really matters. Let this be something good that comes from that day." She stared at the letter for a long moment, speechless. A lump rose in her throat. No one had ever offered her something like this before. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said kindly. "That's enough." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. "All right," she said quietly. "Yes." The boy clapped his little hands happily, though he didn't fully understand what was happening. It was one of those small, beautiful moments that would stay with her forever. That night, as she walked home, the city lights shimmered around her. She felt lighter, freer, like a door she never knew existed had suddenly opened. It wasn't just about school or the future. It was about kindness, how one act could ripple out and touch so many lives. She thought about how different everything might have been if she had walked past that accident, pretending not to see. Life really did turn on the smallest choices. At home, she placed the scholarship letter on her table and sat beside it, lost in thought. She didn't see herself as a hero. She was just an ordinary woman who had done what her heart told her to do. But that simple choice had connected her life with two others in ways she could never have imagined. And somewhere across town, the man sat by his son's bedside as the boy slept, thinking about her too. He had everything: wealth, respect, success, but none of it compared to the peace he felt knowing his child was alive. And that peace came from her. He knew that no matter what he did next, he wanted to live differently, to build a life that honored that moment of bravery, that spark of humanity that had changed them both. Neither of them knew where their paths would lead next. But one thing was certain. What began as a tragedy had turned into a connection that would keep shaping their lives in ways they couldn't yet see. He stood quietly outside her small apartment building, holding a box wrapped in plain brown paper. For a man who usually moved through life with bodyguards and assistants, he looked strangely out of place. The man whose name carried weight everywhere now looked uncertain, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure how to approach a door without a team doing it for him. He took a deep breath before knocking. Inside, she was cleaning up her small living room, still recovering from her burns. When she heard the knock, she wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door, surprised to see him standing there. She blinked, unsure what to say. He wasn't surrounded by cameras or reporters this time, just him, dressed simply, holding that box. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said quietly. She shook her head and moved aside to let him in. "No, not at all. Please come in." He stepped into the small space and looked around. It was modest, and a tiny sofa, a small dining table, and family pictures on the wall. Nothing fancy, but it felt warm and real. He placed the box on the table. "I wanted to thank you. Not in front of cameras, not in a press conference," he said. "Just me," she smiled lightly. "You already thanked me. You don't need to do more." "I do," he replied softly. "You saved my son. I've spent my whole life building things, chasing success, and controlling everything around me. But that day I couldn't control anything. You did what I couldn't." His voice shook slightly, surprising both of them. She could see how deeply it still affected him. "I didn't do it for thanks or recognition," she said. "I just did what felt right." He nodded slowly, then pushed the box toward her. "I know, that's what makes it mean more. Please open it." She hesitated before untying the string. Inside was a small framed photo of his little boy smiling, the same smile that had lit up the hospital room. Beside it lay a handwritten letter. "It's from him," the man said. "He can't write much yet, but he wanted to draw you a thank you." Inside the letter was a child's drawing, a stick figure of a woman holding hands with a smaller one, with a big sun shining above them. At the bottom, written in shaky letters, were the words, "Thank you for saving me." She smiled, eyes watering a little. This means more than anything else." The man looked relieved. "That's all I wanted to give you. Something real." They sat for a while, drinking tea. The conversation turned gentle, about life, work, and small things. He asked about her job at the grocery store, how she managed after the accident, and how she was healing. She told him it was slow, but she was fine. He seemed uncomfortable hearing how little she had, yet how peaceful she seemed with it. "You don't have much," he said quietly. "But you look more content than most people I know." She smiled. "Maybe because I don't have much to lose. When you live simple, every small thing feels like a gift." That line stuck with him. He had spent years surrounded by everything money could buy. Yet this woman, who had risked her life for a stranger's child, spoke about life like she'd already found what he'd been chasing all along. Before leaving, he said, "If you ever need anything, please call me." "Anything at all." She thanked him but shook her head politely. "You've already given me more than I expected." That night, he couldn't sleep. Her words, her calmness, her strength, it all stayed with him. He realized he wanted to do something meaningful for her, not out of pity but out of respect. The next day, he instructed his assistant to find a way to help her discreetly. But she had no debts, no complaints, and no requests. She simply went to work, helped her neighbors, and lived quietly. So he decided to visit again. When he arrived the second time, she looked surprised again. "You came back?" He nodded with a faint smile. "I had a business nearby. Thought I'd check in." She laughed softly, knowing he was lying. He was too honest-looking for his own lie. "You don't have to keep checking on me." "I'm fine, I know," he said. "But maybe I just want to learn how to be more like you." They talked again, and this time the conversation felt easier. He told her stories from his life, how his success had cost him time with his son, how he used to think that emotions were weaknesses. She listened quietly, sometimes offering short replies, sometimes just letting him talk. Over the next few weeks, he visited often, not as a powerful man, but as someone who finally found peace in small moments, a cup of tea, laughter, and the company of someone who didn't treat him like a name on a magazine cover. One afternoon, he asked, "If you could do anything at all, and what would you want?" She thought for a moment. "I'd open a small center for children who have no one to care for them. Maybe a reading corner or a place where they can feel safe. There are so many kids who just need someone to listen." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "That's a beautiful idea." 2 weeks later, she got a call from the city office. A small space had been donated in her name for a community learning center. She was shocked, thinking it was a mistake. But when she called him, he only said, "I told you to call me if you needed something. You didn't, so I guessed instead." She laughed but also felt her eyes sting with tears. "You didn't have to do this. I wanted to," he said. "You gave me back something I lost long ago, and faith in people. Let me return a little of it." When the center opened, he attended quietly, staying in the background as she welcomed children with warm smiles and simple snacks. Reporters later found out and tried to make a big story of it, but he refused interviews. He wanted this to stay pure, her kindness, her dream, untouched by publicity. As days passed, their bond deepened, not romantic, but something rare and real. It was built on respect, understanding, and gratitude. She taught him that real strength wasn't in control or power, but in kindness and courage. He taught her that not all powerful people were cold or selfish. Some just forgot how to feel until someone reminded them. One evening, after the center had been running for a month, he visited again. The children had gone home and she was sitting outside looking at the sunset. "You've changed a lot," she said. "So have you," he replied. "Maybe," she smiled, "but in a good way. You smile more now." He chuckled softly. "I didn't even realize it. My son laughs more too. He talks about you all the time. Says you're his hero," she smiled. "He's mine too. He was so brave that day." There was a long silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just quiet understanding. Finally, he said, "You know, when I saw my car burning that day, I thought my world had ended. But maybe it was just beginning. Maybe it took losing control for me to see what really matters." She nodded slowly. "Sometimes we need a fire to wake us up." They both laughed softly at that, though the words held a deeper meaning. As he left that night, he looked back once more. She was still sitting there watching the sunset, peaceful as always. Something inside him felt lighter, freer, as if the weight of years had finally lifted. In the days that followed, people began to notice the change in him. He became more approachable, more human. At work, he treated his employees differently. At home, he spent more time with his son, not because he felt guilty, but because he wanted to. He often thought about how life had brought two strangers together through tragedy, only to create something good out of it. He realized that sometimes real gratitude isn't just saying thank you, it's living differently afterward. And she too found new meaning in her days. The children at her center gave her laughter and purpose. And though she never sought recognition, her quiet courage continued to inspire everyone around her. Their worlds, once so far apart, had somehow met in the middle. A simple act of bravery had turned into a lasting bond that reminded everyone who heard their story that kindness, no matter how small, could change everything. The months after the community center opened felt like a new chapter for both of them. Life had changed quietly, without grand announcements or ceremonies. The center became a small but bright place where laughter echoed and stories were shared. Every day, a few children from nearby streets would come to read, draw, or just sit and talk. It wasn't fancy, but it felt alive. She loved being there. It gave her purpose, something to wake up for every morning. The walls were covered in children's drawings, and every corner carried warmth, the kind that can't be bought or built with money. The powerful man visited often, but not as the figure people saw on magazine covers. When he came here, he left that world outside. Sometimes he helped fix shelves, sometimes he read to the kids, and sometimes he just sat quietly watching them play. No reporters, no cameras, just life as it should be. One evening, as the day faded into soft orange light, he arrived with his little boy. The child ran straight to her, laughing, and hugged her legs tightly. She knelt down to greet him, brushing his hair gently. "You've grown taller," she said with a smile. He nodded proudly. "Papa says it's because I eat my vegetables now." They all laughed, and for a moment it felt like they were just three people sharing an ordinary day. No titles, no differences. Later, while the boy played with crayons, the man turned to her and said quietly, "You've changed his world, you know. He sleeps better now. He doesn't wake up crying anymore." She looked touched. "He's a strong child. He just needed love and time." He paused before replying. "So did I." Their eyes met for a moment, and though no words followed, the meaning was clear. Sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected people. As the weeks passed, the center grew. A few local businesses began donating books and supplies after hearing about her story. Volunteers came to help. What started as a single act of courage was now turning into a ripple of kindness spreading across the town. But she never took credit. Whenever someone called her a hero, she smiled and said, "Anyone could have done it. I was just there." One afternoon, a journalist who had covered the accident months ago found her again. He wanted to write a follow-up story about what had happened since. She hesitated but agreed on one condition, that the focus be on the children and not her. The article went viral. People were touched not just by the rescue, but by the quiet humility that followed it. Comments poured in from around the world. Angers thanking her for reminding them that good people still existed. The businessman saw the article too. He read every line carefully, and for the first time he felt proud not of what he owned but of the kind of people he was learning from. He decided to do something special, not for her, but with her. One morning he arrived at the center earlier than usual. The children were not there yet, and she was arranging books on a shelf. "I've been thinking," he said. "This place is doing something wonderful. What if we build more like it?" She looked at him, startled. "More centers?" "Yes," he said, his tone calm but full of purpose. "In other towns, maybe even in smaller villages. Places where kids have no safe space to go. You can lead it. I'll take care of everything else." She was quiet for a moment. "That sounds amazing, but I'm not sure I'm ready for something that big." "You're more ready than you think," he replied. "You've already done the hardest part when starting it." He smiled gently. "Let me handle the rest. You just keep doing what you do best, caring." His words stayed with her. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about all the children who could have a place like hers, a corner of safety and kindness. By morning she had made her decision. When he came by the next day, she said simply, "Let's do it." That's how it began. Over the next few months they worked together, planning, visiting locations, meeting volunteers. The powerful man who once only made decisions in boardrooms was now walking through neighborhoods most people forgot about, listening to stories and learning what real strength looked like. People began to notice his transformation. His employees whispered about how different he'd become, kinder, more patient. He no longer walked with that cold distance he once had. Even his business decisions started focusing on community projects and charities. But for him, the real change wasn't in his public image. It was in how he saw the world. The woman who had run into fire for his son had somehow helped him rediscover the humanity he'd lost chasing power. As their work grew, they developed a bond built on quiet trust. They didn't need to speak every thought. They understood each other through simple gestures, a shared smile, a nod, a glance of appreciation. One day, while they were painting a new center's walls with a group of volunteers, his little boy ran in with a piece of paper. "Look," the child said excitedly, holding up another drawing. It showed 3 figures holding hands under a rainbow, him, his father, and her. He handed it to her proudly. "You're part of our family now." Her heart melted at his words. She looked at the man, and he nodded softly, his eyes reflecting quiet emotion. "He's right," he said. "You are." From that day on, things felt even more connected between them. They celebrated the small successes together, each new center opening, each child's laughter. There were no speeches or awards, just genuine moments shared with people who cared. One evening, after a year since that fateful day, they all gathered for the anniversary of the first center. The place was decorated with balloons and paper lanterns made by the children. Parents, volunteers, and neighbors filled the small hall. As she stood in front of everyone holding the microphone, she looked nervous. Public speaking wasn't her thing, but the children's cheers gave her courage. "I don't have big words," she began softly, "but I want to say thank you." When this all started, it was just one small place, and one moment that changed everything. But what I've learned is that kindness doesn't need to be big to make a difference. It just needs to be real. The crowd applauded warmly. She looked toward the man and his son in the front row. The little boy waved at her, smiling from ear to ear. When the event ended, he approached her quietly. "That was beautiful," he said. She smiled. "It's true, though. None of this would have happened if we all didn't believe in something good." He nodded, then looked around at the lights, the laughter, the simple joy filling the room. "You know, I used to think power came from control. Now I know it comes from compassion." She looked at him for a long moment. "Then I guess you're the powerful one now," she said softly. He laughed. "Only because you showed me how." Later that night, after everyone left, she walked outside. The stars were clear and the air was calm. She stood quietly, remembering that day, the smoke, the fear, the heat of the flames. It felt like a lifetime ago. Back then, she never could have imagined how that one act would change not just one child's life, but so many others. The sound of footsteps approached. He joined her, holding his son's hand. The boy yawned sleepily and looked up at her. "Are you coming tomorrow?" "We're going to paint again." She smiled warmly. "Of course. I wouldn't miss it." The man smiled too. "You've made us part of something real," he said. "Not just a project, but a family." She shook her head gently. "We all did it together. That's what makes it special." For a while, none of them spoke. They just stood there watching the quiet street. knowing that somehow life had brought them exactly where they were meant to be. The world had moved on from the headline of a powerful man's child rescued by a stranger. But for them, that moment would always be more than a story. It was the start of a new way of living. A year later, another center opened, then another. Her name became known in many towns, but she stayed humble, never forgetting where it began. And he continued to support quietly, always present but never in the spotlight. Whenever people asked how they started it all, he would simply say, "Because one brave woman reminded me that life is worth more when you share it." And she, when asked about her courage, would smile and reply, "I just did what anyone with a heart would do." The story of that day, the fire, the rescue, the gratitude that followed, had turned into something far greater than anyone could have predicted. It wasn't about fame or power anymore. It was about two lives that crossed paths by fate and decided to turn tragedy into hope. And in the end, it wasn't the flames that defined them, but what they built after, a legacy of kindness that kept burning brightly long after the fire was gone.